Belle Petronella. Hope everyone's doing well. Um, I've put up at the request or the comment, I should say, on one of my videos asking me why I still had the price showing for CoinMarketCap. I've changed it to Yahoo Finance. You were right. So if anybody has a better site, let me know. So one of my girlfriends called me um, a day and a half ago, and kind of like sounding worried, asking me if I was okay. I guess her mom told her that crypto was in like a really bad state, everything was tanking, which naturally she started thinking about XRP and looked up the price and saw that it was pretty low. And she and I have been talking about XRP. I just got to the point where she felt like she wanted to buy it, and now it's like she's over it. So I told her I was fine, and yeah, the market can be tricky and a little volatile, but I was confident it was going to go back up. And she's like, "Well, didn't you lose money?" And I thought about it, and then I tried to explain to her that digital assets are kind of like units, if you want to think of them like that. So even if you lose money, you still have all your units, kind of like stocks, but better. So when the price goes back up, those units are still in place, provided you don't get weird and like mess with them. So she kind of wants to buy it, but I think I told her, look, when you're ready, call me. But I think we're going to have to go through this another couple of times till she feels safe about it. So um, when I met her, I think I met her like over a decade ago. I was in a really kind of weird place in my life. And um, I talk a lot about jotting down your goals. And I still have what I think was like my very first goals list from that time period when I met her. But it's actually a drawing. And I met her when I lived in Tucson, Arizona. I was trying to leave Arizona to get to California. She lived in Arizona too. So um, you can file this one under be careful what you wish for because you might get it. Because those of you planning early for your XRP futures for when the price goes berserk, this might save you a little time about the life goals I had back then, how that worked out for me. Maybe it'll be useful to you. Um, but when I was living in Arizona, I couldn't seem to leave the state no matter what I did. Like, I always said that Arizona has a way of just not letting you go. And I had just learned about the idea of drawing your like pictures of your goals. And I got it from one of my mom's friends. She told me about it on the phone one night. She worked in a jail, but she was also like a salsa dancer. And she wanted some really expensive dancing shoes, but she couldn't afford them. So she drew a picture of them. She was telling me. And then she got them. And I guess she did this all the time. And she would tell me about how the world is just like, she called it one big spiritual soup. And that she would say there's like a ton of invisible stuff floating around out there, kind of like there's microwaves and radio waves, and then there's thought waves that people have. So she said that, some of what's floating around are actual things. You just have to tune into them, and that way you get them to come to you, which kind of made sense. So she told me to make this list of pictures and just put on the list, like on the paper, just draw it out. And that it was really effective. So I was like, all right, well, if it works for her. So I made this drawing and I put myself and my dog because I wanted myself and my dog to be in California. So I drew like a sun for California, and then I put us inside an actual house because that's what I wanted at the time. And I thought I was being really specific. At the time, I was living in Arizona with this biker chick, and she was a pretty big girl and seemed to have a fetish for bringing home much younger, smaller boys that were like just really good looking tiny guys. I don't know. And it was getting weird. And I just felt like that was one of my cues to leave. And in my picture, I also drew stacks of bills, like dollar bills, to indicate money. And lo and behold, not too long after that, I was able to get my first bank loan for like $5,000. And the bank paid me in stacks of 50s, just like the picture I drew. So I thought, oh, maybe there's something to this. So it really works. So I was like pretty confident that, I was actually able to move to California. So that panned out, and with my dog in a house. And I just was like, well, this really, really is, pretty effective. The town was called Lucerne Valley, which at the time I didn't know much about, but I figured it's California. How bad could it be? Well, if you're not familiar with this little nugget, It's best known for its high production of methamphetamine. This is they call it the high desert of Southern California. So in this particular town that I moved to, on any given day, not really many people around, aside from like the occasional person dragging themselves around. They're like creatures. They're not even like people. You just see them pop up out of the blue. And most people in the town didn't have teeth. Um, the town was not like nobody would go there as a vacation destination, in other words. So I don't know how people ended up living there, but I found myself there for an entire year. I think the population was probably about 1,500, felt like 250. I think I had one friend. She lived 15 miles away. I met her at the new job that I got, which was the only job I could get, which was driving to Walmarts all across Southern California and taking pictures of people's babies. And my pictures totally sucked. Like nobody wanted to buy them. So the place that I lived, the owner of the house had 3 pigs that were living on the property outside in like a chain link enclosed fence. And I used to go hang out with them because there's nothing else to do in this town. And I would just like bond with them and feed them bacon. Um, so one time I was inside the house and I heard them screaming. And it was the pigs. So I guess 3 starving dogs that were in the area somehow squeezed themselves into the pen where the pigs were and were trying to rip them apart, like trying to eat them alive. The owner luckily happened to be there that day, grabbed a rifle from somewhere, shot all the dogs dead, and then that was that. They were just kind of laying in the dirt. It was severely traumatizing, but the pigs lived. It was just that kind of area, like Wild West. There was actually a guy in the town, I think his name was like One-Eyed Jack. I think what happened was his left eye got stabbed out with a pocket knife or something. I don't remember, but he was a popular favorite with the locals. So because there's nothing to do in the town, I joined a self-improvement group, and maybe there were 10 people in the group, nice people. One day, some guy shows up. I guess he was just from out of the area. Nobody knew him. Kind of a weird guy, but the whole town was weird. So nothing ever, it didn't make much of a dent, I guess. So naturally, being odd like he was, he gravitated to me, and he would just sit with me every week. Never said much, but his eyes always were very expressive, So I guess he would speak with his eyes. So I just went to this group and lived there and just worked and wondered how I was going to get out of there into, I guess, Los Angeles on this little salary that I had. And the $5,000 that I got that I put on my drawing page specifically to do goals like this woman told me, it was now like amassing interest. I couldn't pay it. So I was totally alone in this town, kind of going broke and desperate for anything to do. And then one day I see this flyer posted in the grocery store, and it said that the circus was coming to town. Circus Vargas, which I thought was a joke because nothing ever happened in this town, but apparently it was not a joke. So, and I guess since the nearby towns also were somewhat depressed with a lack of things to do, it drew people from those towns and their families. So this was like a really big event. And the circus put up a huge tent right in the middle of the town next to the gun shop, I think. They threw in some bales of hay, bleachers, and then people could sit on them, and then that was that. So the night of the circus, they like bring the animals in like before they're going to go into the little stage. And like it was the most oppressive circus you've ever seen, and like the saddest, most reluctant looking animals I had ever witnessed. Never saw a skinny elephant before. And that's when it kind of dawned on me that, well, 2 things, that the circuses were not necessarily pro-animal. And then also that you really need to be specific when you make freaking lists of goals. Because this was like ridiculous. I'm like, how did I get here? So we're waiting for the thing to start, and then all of a sudden we hear the announcer like, welcome to Circus Vargas. And it was the announcer, but you couldn't see him at first, but I guess because they didn't have like a proper speaker system, he sounded a little bit muffled. Well, I look up and it's the weird guy from my group. He was the announcer, which everything was like, of course it was, right? Like this town, you just never know. So he was, I guess, covering the microphone with the sleeve of his jacket to make the sound effects better. And which actually kind of made my night. Like that was the one high point of, I'll never forget that night. It was an entire year until I could get out of there, but I think that was like the one thing that I held on to. Like life isn't so bad. So when I finally did move, I told my group, and this woman in my group actually cried about it, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, well, maybe she thinks really highly of me, but I think it's really because the town was losing a member, and they really needed the numbers. So everyone counts, you know. I think the lesson here for me, maybe for you, is not just like to be careful what you wish for, but really be specific more than you think you need to be, because when you're planning out your amazing new lives, uh, the universe has a funny way of like giving you what you want, but also like filling in the little details if you don't. So, word to the wise. And sometimes when I'm doing research about crypto and XRP and the market, I come across a lot of really just like kind of crazy stuff that's like, I guess you could say circusy. There's so much great info. I mean, really technical analysts that are just really great at what they do. There's so many good like fact-based researchers that do all kinds of great stuff. They have YouTube channels and there's great articles. But then there's also this stuff, right? So if you really start going down this rabbit hole, I guess you could call it the crypto carnival. This community doesn't have elephants, but we have bears. So there's prophets. I've seen psychics for the crypto sphere. I've seen all kinds of stuff. So anyway, wanted to share some of it with you. Stuff that I've just kind of stumbled across recently. One is this guy. He has some things to say about Bitcoin. Sometimes when I hear Bitcoin, I just replace it with XRP where possible, but he's a prophet of some type. You could say he's kind of accurate. I mean, he talked about this back in January. And he says he perceives in his spirit about the falling of the economy, especially concerning Bitcoin. He says, Bitcoin's becoming very popular these days. Be careful. He says, it will plunge and it will fall, which I think is saying the same thing. But anyway, this was in January. I'll link to it if anyone's interested. Sometimes I just like to get away from the seriousness of it all. This is, the Bitcoin time traveler. Many of you have probably come across him on Reddit. If this guy is not joking, then I don't know what this means for XRP, because he doesn't have a very rosy outlook for Bitcoin. I'll tell you that. And yeah, it's kind of long. But one of the quotes is that, where's the quote? Most people who own any significant amount of Bitcoin no longer speak to their families and lost their friends because they had to change their identities. He's talking about the future. There have been also a few suicides of people who could not handle the guilt after seeing what happened to the bag holders, the type of skeptical people who continued to believe it would eventually collapse, even after hearing the rumors of governments buying Bitcoin. Many people were taken hostage, and thus, it is suspected that 25% of Bitcoin rich actually physically tortured someone to get him to spill his password. Just some light reading, you know? I've noticed time travelers never seem to have any good news to share with anyone, which I don't get. Find me one. So I'd like to put out a call to action. If there are any more crypto time travelers listening, lurking around, just give us the good news from now on, would you? Because we're over it. Where is he? Jeff Berwick. He's really interesting. He's an entrepreneur. He's big in crypto. He holds crypto conferences every year. They're called Anarchapulco. And he has some interesting guests on. I've been following him for a while. I know he was big on, is it EOS? I can never say that. EOS and Bitcoin. He's never, to my knowledge, until recently said much about XRP, which he calls it Ripple. But in fact, a couple of months ago, one of his subscribers on his live stream brought up XRP in the topics, and he just kind of blew it off. But this video, which was like a couple of days ago, he was doing a talk about the current state of crypto. It was called the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And when he said, well, now for the ugly, someone in the audience like yelled out Ripple or XRP. And then he said, yeah, I'm thinking about buying it because I know it's going to go up. And, you know, I'm having like a moral dilemma over it. But when you've got Bill Clinton and Ben Bernanke, you know, shilling it, it's probably going to go up. So anyway, he's an interesting person. to follow. Then there's Polny. Last week I posted something from him, from his channel, Gold 2020 Forecasts, like a biblical perspective from that channel. And his crypto price predictions, interestingly enough, are pretty spot on, at least in the short term. I haven't really been looking at his stuff for a very long time, but I do think it's interesting. And he mentions as well, I think it's this video, that he bought Ripple. He calls it Ripple or Ripple XRP. So midway through, I think, the video, he mentions that he thinks there's better coins to buy, but he has bought XRP. So I'll link to the videos in that description. And then this video, which is right before that last one, I think this was like a day before that, he gets really specific with prices for the remainder of this year, which is almost over, and into next year. He actually said that it was going to start this week. He said that a few days ago. So he said that Bitcoin and other coins will move much, much higher as the stock market crashes. I don't know how they always know this stuff, but they do. Biblical perspectives. Finally, just do your own research. This is all just for the love of crypto. These are my opinions. And, remember, there's many channels out there. This one happens to be storytelling centric. It's just what I like to do. So those of you who are asking me why I tell stories, I don't know, because I can. I was born this way. Anyway, hope to see you all on the moon someday. Have a great rest of the day.